I'll introduce myself in case we haven't met. My name is Marc Buwalda, the lead pastor here at Fairview Fellowship Church. So glad that you're here, and I hope you've been welcomed a couple times. But if you're new to our church, if you're new to this, you are our very special guest today. And so just know that you're welcome here. We have a seat for you here. We have a place for you. And we've been saying over the last couple months, we're not trying to bring people to an event. We're not trying to bring you to a unique location, a facility. We want to bring you and welcome you into a family. And that family is built on the foundation that we've been singing about, the cross that we've been talking about. This whole community, this church is not built, established, or held up by the gifts of any person, certainly not the person in front of you, but on the sacrifice that Christ has made for us, and then on the gifts of the body coming together. And so if you're new, you are welcome here with whatever you bring with you. And to those watching online, glad that you are at home or wherever you're at watching us and joining with us today and celebrating from afar. I've met a number of new families over the last couple months, and a pretty regular thing is, we've been watching online for a couple weeks, and we thought we would make the jump. And that's just been so exciting. I think when we very, very quickly through COVID had to invest in online streaming, we didn't know what we were doing. Let's just put something up there so that we can connect, and didn't know whether we'd hang on to that afterwards, but it's become a really great first step into life as a church. I know some of you here today, that was your part of your story is, I've heard of this, I'm curious, I'll watch online and see what's going on, and then you're here. So I'm glad that everyone's here today. You happy to be here today? Good. I'm very, very excited. I say that every week. You probably get tired of hearing me say that, but too bad. Over the past month or so, we've been in a series called Neighboring 101, and if you've been with us for even one Sunday during this series, or caught one podcast, or watched online one time, you know that our main centering passage here is in Matthew 22, verses 34 to 30. The passage that becomes known, that we know, we just talked about the Great Commission, Jesus commissioning us to go and make disciples, where here is what we have, the Great Commandment. The mission is to make disciples, but Jesus says, now this is the Great Commandment. And in this passage, I won't read the whole thing, I'll jump to verse 37, but an expert in the Jewish law was trying to test Jesus, maybe try to trip him up, and he said to him, what is the greatest command? There are a lot of commands, a lot of things that we have to do, a lot of things that we're supposed to avoid, but Jesus, what's the most important? And what would have happened had Jesus picked one specific command? There probably would have been a follow-up argument of, you're saying that this law is not as important then. Interesting. And so Jesus, in his perfect wisdom, replies this, beginning in verse 37. Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. A question that I ask myself often when I read Scripture, particularly the Gospels, reading the words of Jesus. And in some Bibles, they're printed in red ink to draw special attention to them. Here's the question I ask that keeps me on track. Keeps me convicted and keeps me very humble. What if Jesus was serious? What if Jesus was serious? It's a bit tongue-in-cheek. Of course, we should take these words seriously because Jesus was serious. He meant the things that he said. He meant for those who were in front of him to hear the words and to be confronted by the words. He meant for those words to then travel to other people. Did you hear what Jesus said? He meant for those words to be written down and passed on, perhaps even so that we would encounter them in the year 2023 and ask the same question. What if Jesus was serious about this stuff? It's a pretty convicting question if you think about it, especially in regards to this command, this twofold command. What if he was serious that we should love God and love our neighbor as ourselves? A lot of us are probably doing, I'm guessing, better with the first half. And this is kind of the point of this series. I know I do better with the first half, if for no other reason than the parts of loving God are easily expressible on the outside. You can see that I'm at church, I'm a pastor. There's things that I can do that you really can't argue with. I can say, no, I love God. It's in my mind and it's in my heart, and you really can't argue with that. So I can be confident in my love for God. It's the second part that's a little more difficult. Are we actually loving neighbor as we love ourselves? I imagine some of us resonate with a quote that I found this week. I was reading a book by Shannon Martin. The book is called Start With Hello. By the way, in the back of your worship guide, we've put some resources the past couple weeks, books that have been influential to me as I've been studying and reading. So if you want to check those out, there's other books as you may want to go and learn more and dive into this idea. But here's what Shannon Martin writes about this. She said, I was taught that it is good to love my neighbor, yet for a long time I assumed that not actively hating my neighbor was good enough. Okay, some chuckles. You know that feeling. Yeah, Pastor. I know we should love our neighbor, but chill out a little bit. I don't hate my neighbor, so get off my back. Because we can convince ourselves that these commands are on a sliding scale. But when we realize that Jesus is serious, we realize it's not a sliding scale. We are either loving our neighbor as we love ourselves, or we are not. If Jesus was serious, and I do think he was and is, then the most important command is not just loving God, but loving God and loving neighbor as we love ourselves. And if that's true, some of us may have some work to do, may have some changes to make. One of the ways that we've been talking about how can we as a church do this is through NeighborLink. And if you've been here every week, you know the whole story of what NeighborLink is. But this is not just an idea. This is not just an organization we're trying to get you to think about or Google or support. This is something that we're trying to initiate here in Noble County. And so I'm recapping it every week because I want you to not only catch the vision, I want you not only to be inspired, I want you to know some of the details. And so that's why I'm repeating it each week, because this is very important. And this push, this initiative, the vision for NeighborLink is going to far outlast the length of this series, which in fact will wrap up next Sunday. But NeighborLink is an organization, it's centered in Fort Wayne, that exists to connect neighbors who have needs with neighbors who can meet those needs. That's about as simple as I can describe it. Think about the types of needs that your neighbors have. Maybe the types of needs that you have. Gutters need cleaned. Some people, that is no problem. It can be taken care of. But for some people, gutters need cleaned. Some of you are elbowing your spouse right now. See, God said you got to clean those gutters. Simple for a lot of people. Gutters, clean the gutters. If you don't, the leaves get clogged up, water's pouring everywhere, seeds get in there, start to grow, then you got a tree growing on top of your house. Nobody wants that. But what if you don't have a ladder? What if you don't have a ladder? Right? I don't have a ladder. I steal the churches anytime we need a ladder. And I always bring it back. But what if you don't have a ladder? What if you are not physically able to you have a ladder, but you're not physically able to get up on a ladder? Your mobility is limited. You're scared of heights. The ladder is not safe. The ladder is wobbly. You have a need. I'm sure some of us in this room have this need, and I'm confident some of your neighbors do as well. In the summer, sometimes lawns need mowed. And if you live next to a house or in your area where the lawn is overgrown and overgrown and overgrown, it's probably tempting to call the non-emergency police number and get them out there, right? Leave a little citation on the window. You have 15 days to mow your lawn or else face a small fine. But what if someone doesn't have a lawnmower? What if someone doesn't have money for gas in their lawnmower? What if someone is not physically able to push a lawnmower because of bodily limitations or age? What if you can't mow your grass? That's a very real need. What if someone needs a wheelchair ramp but doesn't have the resources? Can't just call a carpenter or a contractor they know to say, hey, can you come build this? I'm getting older and it's a little harder to get around, whether it's for a wheelchair or just safer mobility. I need some help. That's a very serious need in a community. These types of needs are where NeighborLink comes in. It's connecting, identifying needs in the community, being posted. Can you pull that picture of that website back up? They're posted on a website, and then they get accepted by neighbors. The projects get accepted by neighbors like you and me. Perhaps it's your community group who takes on a project. Maybe it's your family who takes on a project. Maybe it's the men's ministry, the women's ministry, our youth group taking on a project. This is what NeighborLink does. It's a Christ-centered organization because, as I shared a number of weeks ago, I'm confident, I'll say 99% of this room is in agreement with the Great Commission that we need to make disciples and then help them live out discipleship by teaching them God's commands. I'm also confident that 99% of us in this room are on board with this great commandment that we've been reading, that we should love God and we should love other people. 99%. I'm confident that 99+% of us in this room know that needs exist in our community because they're next door, they're 2 doors down, they're across the street. We know all these things, and yet sometimes there's a gap between what we know and the thing that we know we're supposed to do. NeighborLink is simply saying we want to connect. We want to close that gap and find the people who are willing, committed to loving neighbors in philosophy, in principle, and moving that to action and mobilizing these people right here, Christians, into action in a way that loves their neighbors. This is what NeighborLink does. Right now there's 10 locations, including Fort Wayne, DeKalb County, Indianapolis, Adams County, Grant County, and others. My goal, my vision, my prayer is for us to launch a NeighborLink affiliate here in Noble County, NeighborLink Noble County, here in the coming months, so that when you know of a need, you can help that need get met, so that people in our community, so we can partner with organizations like the Council on Aging, so that you can have confidence that maybe you can't build a wheelchair ramp, but through NeighborLink, you can make the need known. This is the vision and the goal. This is something that won't be a ministry of our church. I've had some people ask that. And again, I told you I'm going to give you some details today because I want to just keep trying to fill in the gaps of what we're aware of. This is not a ministry of our church, but I believe God has put our church in position to be a central church body, a central group of believers to mobilize and bring energy into this. This can't happen because I want it to happen. This can't happen because it's a great idea. It has to happen with grassroots effort. And there are no grassroots efforts in the history of the world stronger, more passionate than the Christian movement. 2,000 years of history without a budget, without marketing, without social media, and without screens. Christians have been loving their neighbors because they love God. And that's what we're a part of today. And that's what I'm so excited to do, to figure this out. I've had people ask me lately, well, what's going on? Can we do anything yet? And we will get to that. Right now, I'm working behind the scenes to try to establish a board of directors. This isn't just like a fun idea or a club. It's a separate 501c3 nonprofit in the community. So it needs to have a board of directors. If you are interested, if you know someone who's interested, if you pray about it and you think you have experience serving on a board, writing grants, being in a position of leadership, or if you have no experience but God's put that on your heart, please reach out to me. Establishing a board of directors. The 2 other things I'm trying to put together are neighboring churches. This will not happen, cannot happen, impossible, I would say, without the buy-in of the local church. Not a local church, one local church, but the local church of the entire county and beyond. We need men and women who have been changed by Christ, willing to love the way Christ has loved us. Has to be other churches. So I'm meeting with and talking to other pastors to say, are you on board? Would you like to be a part of this? There's not one specific way. It's not money or a commitment or anything like that. You have to do a sermon series. None of that. It's simply saying, pastor, congregation, would you want to be a neighboring church? And to figure out what that means. If you know a pastor, you have a friend, a family in another church, start talking to them about this. Send them a link to NeighborLink. Send them a link to this sermon. One of the sermons we've been talking about. Then the last thing I'm doing right now is trying to put together groups of neighboring organizations, leaders, business owners, and organizations in the community, like the Council on Aging, like the Chamber of Commerce, different groups in the community that have a vested interest that are already doing these types of things. So those are the details. That's what's happening there. Now this is the question that's come up almost every week. We've had Eric Wood, the executive director of NeighborLink, join us twice now, and he alluded to this last week, but it's come up every single week. I've had someone say, I'm really excited about this. Big smile. I can't wait for this. And here's the two questions. What next? What now? What next? And what now? And these are such pertinent questions because it's like, well, yeah, I don't want to just leave. I'm ready to do this. Now, here's the good news. I think we left you with this last Sunday, and I'll say it again today. You do not have to wait for NeighborLink Noble County to be launched to love your neighbor today. Amen? Do you have neighbors today? Do you have neighbors today? Do you think you have neighbors that have needs today? There you go. That's where it begins. And then hopefully NeighborLink will come alongside the work that you are already doing. We are already doing. I want to show you a little bit today through Scripture what I believe this impact can look like, what I believe this process may look like. If you have a Bible, would you open up to the book of John? Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. We'll be in chapter 6, and we're going to begin in verse 1. Probably a number of us are familiar, while you're turning there, a number of us are familiar with this story. If you grew up in church, if you've gone to Sunday school, vacation Bible school, this is one of those stories a lot of us have heard. Jesus feeds the 5,000. Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is the Sea of Tiberias. And a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover festival was near. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Philip answered him, "It would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each person to have a bite." Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. "Well, here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish, but how far will they go among so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass in that place, and they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. When they had all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over. Let nothing be wasted." So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. You've probably heard that story. Maybe you've heard it just in regards to the miraculous power that Jesus had. You may have heard some nuanced things about that story. Yeah, he fed 5,000, but they only counted men at the time, and so there's a chance that this is 10 or 15,000 people, maybe more if you can include everyone who was there. It's an amazing story of the power that Jesus has over any given moment to do the things that God put on his heart to do. I'm going to walk us through this text by focusing on 4 elements to the story that you're going to find primarily in verses 5 through 11. And here's the four things we're going to look at today: the people, the plan, the problem, and the process. The people, the plan, the problem, and the process. First, the people. We find this in verse 5. When Jesus looked up, he saw a great crowd coming toward him, and he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" The people. I have heard it said regarding a lot of organizations, certainly the church, the only thing that stands in the way of perfection when it comes to the church, the only thing keeping us from being a perfect organization are the people. That's you. You're the only thing standing in the way is the people. The church would be wonderful. Church, I'm telling you, my job would be so good if it wasn't for all of you. And sometimes your life would be so much better if it wasn't for this guy on the stage. But we're people. We're messy. Maybe this goes for other organizations as well. Maybe the place where you work. You love the mission and the vision of your employer. You love what you do for a living. You love whatever it is. You work with your mind. You work with your hands. You love it. The only problem is that you're not the only employee. You got to work with all those other people. Maybe it's school. Maybe it's another organization you're a part of. I bet some of your families would be wonderful if you just didn't have all those people in the house all the time, right? People are messy. People are needy. This is no new phenomenon. We see it here in Scripture. As the people show up, so do their needs. They're hungry. Right off the bat, they're hungry, and hunger is not a bad thing in and of itself, but it's a real and pressing need in the lives of every human, and if that need is left unmet, that's when things get bad. Hunger is not bad. Hunger is a great thing. It reminds us that we need food. It reminds us that food is a blessing, that food tastes good, but when a need goes unmet, things become clunky. Things get messier than they already are. Hungry people become hangry people very quickly, which is why we try to limit the sermon to 30 minutes. Get you out of here before that happens. But it's a real need. Everybody has needs, and when those needs go unmet, something shifts. Maybe that need is that gutter that needs cleaned. Maybe it's the lawn that needs mowed. Maybe it's a broken step on a front porch that you don't have the means to meet. A need unmet can become embarrassing. It can become a point of shame. It can become a problem. Why did 5,000 people get together and no one think maybe somebody should have packed a lunch? Like, does the 5,000 people, do they have any responsibility for this at all? Maybe. Maybe it's their fault they're hungry. Maybe they should have had a little better of a breakfast, right? That's on them. That's what the disciples could have responded to Jesus. Hey, yeah, they're probably hungry, but that'll teach them. They need to be more responsible like us. And it's easy to have that mentality sometimes when dealing with problems. Well, those problems are deserved. That person struggles financially, but that's because they didn't pursue the right educational path, get a right job. That person is struggling, well, that's just because they're lazy. That person's porch is broken because they don't prioritize those things enough. But regardless, what we see here, we see no judgment if the people are hungry. We only see people with a need and then Jesus speaking into that need. Your neighbors have needs. My neighbors have needs. I've told you each week I've been walking and I've been looking and I've been praying. And almost every time this past week that I've walked with my dog, I've seen a new need. This last week, around the corner from my house, not on my street, but a street over, I was walking, and there's a house, and it's a pretty nice house, but on the side of their garage, there's a door, and the whole bottom section of the door just busted out. It's gone. It's missing. They need a new door. I don't know this family yet. I don't know who lives there. I've seen people come and go, but I don't know them personally. But I've seen needs. These are real needs. What happens when a door is left all busted open? Probably get cats in there and trash in there, and it's not secure. And I'm sure they are aware of it. I'm sure they, we got to fix that at some point. But who has time to do that, right? There's a need. I've been seeing these things over and over and over. You have neighbors with needs. And part of our encouragement and my challenge to each of you is simply to pray and ask God, open my eyes to the needs around me. It's so easy to walk or to live or to be with our eyes glued to the device in our hand. It's natural now, but we need Holy Spirit power at times to put the phone away and to begin to look, not with judgment, but simply with grace and say, Holy Spirit, show me the needs. Oh, my next door neighbor, they've had a flat tire. How many days has that tire been flat? Hey, that window's broken. That door is off a hinge. This person lives alone. I wonder if they're doing okay. People have needs. Fortunately, there is a plan. Thank goodness, there's a plan. Verse 6, where shall we buy bread for these people to eat? Jesus asked. But he asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Jesus already had the plan. He says he already had in mind everything he was going to do. Although the miracle itself is yet to occur, this may be my favorite part of this passage. Not the miracle itself, but that Jesus already had it. He had the plan in his mind long before anything happened. And the reason I love that so much, church, let me tell you, the plan isn't up to us. Sigh of relief. The plan is not up to us. The plan, Jesus already has a plan. As a follower of Christ who sees needs around him, as a pastor trying my best to lead a church, I am so thankful that the plan is not up to me. Now, there are unique responsibilities within that plan, as we'll see as we keep reading here, but I know how quickly I can become, when I look at a needy person, a need in general, I can become overwhelmed. I can become discouraged. I can become frustrated when I look at those things because I feel a pressure that I have to do something. I have to put together a plan. And we see here that Jesus knew the plan is established. The plan is done. If you would look in John, I think I'll have it on the screen, John chapter 5:17, Jesus said, this is a different situation, Jesus said to them, my Father is always at work. To this very day, I too am working. So church, it's not up to us to initiate a plan. It's up to God's people simply to join him in the plan that's already in progress. You don't have to have a good idea about this at all. You don't have to be creative. You don't have to be thinking outside of the box. God has put a plan into motion, and I'm looking at him right now. And it's a good-looking plan. You look good today, church. Don't laugh. You can laugh. You're plan A. There is no plan B. I know when we make plans, or maybe me, I'll just use me, I don't pick on you, I got to make plans like A, B, C, and D, because a lot of my plans fail. They're not very good. So I have to come up with contingencies. I do that almost every night if I'm responsible for making dinner for the kids. Well, we'll try chicken nuggets, and if they refuse those, we'll do Campbell's soup, and if I better have grilled cheese ready, because whatever I make, they don't like. Got to have plans A, B, C, and D. Jesus has no plan B. Jesus has no, this will happen if the first plan. So it's contingencies. You may say that's irresponsible. Jesus says, nope, that's divine. That's how it works. You're looking at plan A right now. Everyone in this room, watching online, listening to a podcast later, you are plan A. The plan is not up to us. Our goal, our responsibility is to join Jesus in the plan already in motion. Where do you begin? The world's a messy place. Homelessness is an issue even locally. There's a crisis regarding drugs in our community and way beyond. Orphan care. Financial poverty. Needs everywhere. Where do we even begin? Our job is not to come up with a plan for each of these things, but to join Christ in his work already in motion. This is good news because it means you don't have to wait on the government. Praise God, anybody? You don't have to wait on the government to put together a plan, because that's not going to happen, and whoever gets voted in next is just going to trash it and start over, and then they'll right? Jesus' plan hasn't changed. Do you have neighbors? Love them. Do they have needs? Meet them. 2,000 years later, should we get a new plan? Nope. What's wrong with the old one? If it's not broken, don't fix it. This plan persists. You don't have to wait on the government. You don't have to wait on a social worker to come in and step in. Oh, I hope someone sees that need. You don't have to come up with it on your own. We just step into the plan that Jesus is already working on. Now, the people have needs, and Jesus has a plan, but there's a problem. Verse 7, Philip answered him, it would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. There's always a problem. And as the problem often is, in this moment, the problem has to do seemingly with money. It's too expensive to buy food for 5,000 men, not to mention the people they brought along with them. We got a problem. But I would propose to you that the problem has nothing to do with money at all, but in fact is just a problem. The problem is in fact a mindset. A mindset, not money. Because in this moment, Philip has a scarcity mindset. He sees the people. He may even realize the plan, but his vision is limited by this idea of scarcity. How big the problem seems and how small the resources may actually be. They didn't bring food. It's not like Philip thought ahead and prepared food for 4,000 and then 5,000 showed up. That would just be frustrating, right? Are you kidding me? 5,000 of you came? I packed lunches for 4,000. Now what are we going to do? No, they didn't bring anything. They have nothing to give, nothing to meet this need with. And in the moment, he gives himself over to this scarcity mindset. The problem's too big, the resources are too small. And at the core of that belief is simply the issue of fear. What's going to happen? The people are going to get hungry, we can't feed them. The people are going to leave, hungry is going to go to hangry real quick. The little kids are going to lose their minds. Everyone's going to go home and write a bad Google review about how they didn't have any food for us at this big event out in the middle of nowhere. Why'd they pick that anyway? But there's this idea of fear. There's a need to be met, and I can't meet it. This is human. This is called being human. You see a need, and you know, I can't do anything about that. Homelessness is not something reserved for Chicago, Indianapolis, or San Francisco. Homelessness is an issue in Kendallville, Indiana. I can't do anything about that. That overwhelms me. I have fear that there's a need that if I try to meet it, I'm going to fall woefully short. And you're absolutely right, I will. The needs are too big and they outweigh our resources. But what we see here is that Philip's doing what we all do. He's thinking, looking at the crowd, looking at the needs. And he goes, what's the worst that could happen? This is going to be a really bad day, right? Is anybody's mind, you just automatically drift to what's the worst that can happen? Be honest. Who are our worriers? Yep, our pessimists. It's okay. It's how God made you. You need to be aware of that. You need to own it. You need to lean into it. What's the worst that could happen? This is natural. What's the worst that could happen? Sometimes this phrase is a very, very good thing. This phrase alone has probably saved the lives of millions, maybe tens of millions. I'm going to say hundreds of millions of teenage boys between the ages of 14 and 19. That's the only thing why a lot of us are still alive today, because somewhere in the back of our caveman brain, a thought came up and it said, what's the worst that could happen if I jump off this giant ledge, if I take my bike off this ramp, off the thing, right? What's the worst that could happen? And we listen to that voice and go, yeah, you should let the other guy go first. Church, here's what we need to do. Because we have power, not of our own, but from Jesus. We have a life that is behind us, left behind in the waters of baptism. We're walking in a new life empowered by the Spirit. I'm not telling you do not think Or I'm not telling you to get rid of the phrase, what's the worst that could happen, because it can be wise. There can be wisdom in that. Here's what you need to also consider, though. What's the best that could happen? What's the best that could happen? What is the best that could happen with the situation in front of you? Because sometimes I know we use fear as an excuse. I use fear as an excuse. And sometimes that fear is honest, and sometimes it's unfounded. Because what are we afraid of? Let's think about our neighbors again. I bet that through this series, through this last month, you've had an interaction, maybe not taking a step into conversation, but you've seen a person, and you've thought, that's what Pastor Marc's been talking about. That's what Eric was talking about. I need to get to know their name. I want that story. I see a need, and maybe I can meet it. But fear creeps in and says, what's the worst that could happen? Well, they're going to be rude to me. It's going to be awkward. They've introduced themselves to me 3 times, and I haven't remembered their name, and I'm going to feel really bad about myself. And so we go, well, the fear wins. I'm not going to engage in this. But we need to be honest about fear, because fear is a liar. What's the best that could happen if you introduce yourself to the neighbor that you've been avoiding? What's the best that could happen if we step into someone else's life and meet their needs? What possibly could be the best that could happen if we would get to know the people that God has put in our lives? I want to give all of us permission to see not just the limitation, not just what's the worst that could happen, not to take this mindset that Philip has, but to see the thing that Jesus is trying to get him to see, and that's the opportunity. There's a problem, but then Jesus brings a process in verses 8 through 11. Another of the disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. Here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will they go among so many? Jesus said, have the people sit down. There was plenty of grass in that place, and they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. Jesus took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. The people had a need. Jesus had the plan in mind. Yes, there was a problem, but Jesus saw through the process. And where did this process take place? How did this process happen? I love it. You see it in the details of how this story unfolds. When did the miracle take place? Did Jesus pray and then 5,000 people looked down and there was fish and bread, little Long John Silver's to-go bag in their lap? No, it didn't fall from heaven. Didn't appear magically all at once. It only happened when they took something very, very small and they gave it to Jesus, and then Jesus took that thing and did something amazing with it. 5 pieces of bread, 2 little fish, fed 10 to 15,000 people. Only when they took something that they had to offer, as small and as comical as it was. And you know it's comical. I mentioned this to the worship team this morning, because when he mentions it, when Andrew mentions it, he could have said, and you know he's being silly here, right? He has a bad attitude about this. We can't read the tone into this, but it has to be. There's 5,000 men there, maybe 10, 15,000 people. All of Kendallville showed up, and there's no food. He could have said, yeah, I don't know what we're going to do. Here's a kid with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. What's that going to do? And that's not what he said. He went out of his way to be extra petty and negative, right? He goes, well, there's 5 small loaves of bread, kid. Oh, and those are some pretty little fish. Are those even keepers? He goes out of his way to say how ridiculous it is. 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. No, 5 small loaves and 2 little fish. But Jesus doesn't care. He says, have the people sit down. I've got a plan, and I'm about to put it in the process. But he uses the gifts that the boy brings in the process. Church, in God's kingdom, the smallest things often make the biggest impact. I was reading this week, and one of the books that I've been going through, we go back to the Great Commission, right? We just read it a moment ago, that we're supposed to reach the world. We're supposed to reach the entire world. And sometimes we can think that's a pretty big calling. And I can't do that. All authority has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations. That is a big project. And sometimes we think that a big project must require big plans. And we look at those, and I look at those, and I go, I don't have the plans big enough for that. But from the very beginning, over and over throughout the gospel, as Jesus talks about the kingdom, it's the small things that make the biggest difference. That's why Jesus did not say that when you go into all the nations, you need to put together a marketing campaign. You need to build a base of leaders and communicators, whoever can talk the best, whoever can work the hardest, whoever's the most attractive, has the most networking connections. Do all of these things and then establish your 501c3 and then leverage your networking and the people in your networks and then do all. He didn't do any of that. He said, love God and love your neighbor. Love God and love your neighbor. Love God and love your neighbor. And I know sometimes like, there's no way. It's got to be bigger than that. It's not. 2,000 years, the plan has been the plan. You and I are plan A, and the process is simply loving the people God has put in our path. Church, we have an opportunity to bless those around us in a way that will impact eternity. What's next? People keep asking, what's next? I say this, do something. For real, do something. It's not that hard. It's not rocket science. A couple years ago, and this has been a part of my life that I've been developing, I've been petrified and paralyzed with fear if I don't have every answer before I launch a new opportunity. I want everything done. I want it wrapped up. I want there to be no mistakes. And I had an interaction with a leader from Fort Wayne who runs a large organization, and he challenged me, and he said this, forget perfect and just act. If it fails, we'll fix it. Forget perfect and just act. If it fails, we'll fix it. Church, do something. If you can bake cookies, bake some cookies this week. Give them to somebody. No one's turning down cookies, right? No one's doing that. I don't care how much your neighbors don't like it. They will accept those cookies begrudgingly. We tried to do this a couple of years ago. One of my favorite foods in the summer is strawberry shortcake. You can go pick strawberries, get fresh ones, and it's my mom's recipe that we make for shortbread, and I just love it. And so we had a bunch left over, so I went to my neighbor, and I said, hey, would you like, we just made, it's still warm. It's like, the strawberries were on the vine 6 hours ago. Can I bring you over some strawberry shortcake? We brought it over there. And he goes, I don't eat fruit. I go, you want the shortcake? He goes, absolutely. And he liked it. We did